Everyone, I'm Chetan here and welcome back to my video series. So in today's video, we're gonna learn about what is TestNG, okay, from automation perspective or from a Selenium perspective, and why do we use it? Yeah. So let's take a scenario wherein we are working on a project called as Amazon, right? And let's say Amazon has got 100 test cases to be automated, okay? Now, whenever you're automating any project, so of course, uh, if we think of the modules which we have learned so far in the core Java phase, what we do is basically we create certain class. Let's say public class, let's say pay, or let's say uh, order product. Okay, let's say I want to automate one test case related to order product, and then we were creating main method in it, right? And under main method we were trying to write down certain code basically, right? And then we used to execute this particular main method, right? Now of course, if I've got 100 test cases, I need to create 100 such classes, isn't it? Right? Maybe uh, order product, or maybe delete product, okay, or maybe I'm gonna say here, okay, add card details, and so on and so forth, right? So so with the concepts we have learned so far, if we go with that approach, of course we have to create different classes for each test case, and in each test case we're gonna write down the main method and we'll have to run it, right? But now if I ask you a question, okay, I want to run these 100 test cases in one go, right? How to do that? So of course it is not possible with this approach, right? I cannot select all the classes in one go or all test cases in one go and simply click run, right? It will not work that way. So, and if I think of another approach wherein I write certain logic through which I'm going to invoke all 100 tests, again it will take a lot of effort, right? So so the number one problem statement here is that batch execution. So how do we achieve batch execution, right? Now, second point. Now let's say these test cases are interdependent with each other, and while executing these test cases, I want to make sure this test case gets executed first, then this gets executed later on, and so on and so forth. So how do I do that with the concept whatever we learned so far, right? It's not possible, or it is not that easy. So let's say so it's basically priority. Or if I want to define dependencies across these test cases, for example, if my order product test case fails, I don't want to execute delete product, okay? I don't want to execute add card details, right? So how do I define dependencies between these test cases, right? So dependency is another concept. Now, if I have 100 test cases, let's say 75 test cases belong to regression, and let's say 25 test cases belong to sanity, right? Now at any point of time I want to only execute 25 test cases, and I don't want to execute these 75 test cases. So how do I define that in my project? How do I only execute the test cases which belong to sanity test bank? So the concept of grouping test cases comes in picture, right? Then few more concepts: how do I pass data to these test cases, and so on and so forth, right? So if you see, to summarize, if you see with the approach whatever we learned so far, we used to write down classes, and under that main we used to write down the code and we used to execute, right? But with this approach we find it difficult to achieve these different things: how the performing batch execution, defining priorities, dependencies, and grouping, right? So in order to have these features in automation, basically we go for something called as TestNG framework. Okay, so TestNG is a framework, okay, developed by Apache, okay, and the long form is test its next generation. Okay, now, so I hope I've set up the context here what is TestNG and why we need it. So if somebody asks you a question, what is TestNG and why we need it? So the answer is this. In order to achieve batch execution of your test cases, in order to define priorities, dependencies, and groups to your test cases, we always go for TestNG framework, because TestNG is a framework by Apache which gives you these features. I mean, which has this inbuilt features. You don't have to write any code associated with it. Okay, so let's say it practically. I'm sure when we take some examples, you will clearly understand this concept, right? Now, now moving on. Now the next thing is, how do I install it, right? How to install TestNG on in your Eclipse, right? So of course, TestNG has got jars, right? The way we have learned Excel connectivity, the same goes with TestNG as well. TestNG is also a jar file, right? So how do I import that jar in my project? So there are two ways. You can download these jars from internet and import it in your project, okay? Or you can also add TestNG as plugin in your Eclipse, right? So how to do that? Okay, so let's see this approach, okay, because this is the most common approach used by everyone. So we'll add it as a plugin. So let me connect to internet, just a second. So I'll connect my laptop to internet. Yep. So yeah, here we go. So I've connected to internet. Now how do I install TestNG? How do I add TestNG as a plugin in Eclipse? So all you have to do is go to help and go to Eclipse marketplace. So you'll see the marketplace window coming up now. Yeah, so it's coming up, and you need to search with the word TestNG here. So if you see here, I'm gonna search TestNG and just say enter. Okay, so if you see, so this is like a Play Store. The For example, we you have Android mobiles, right? And we have an Android Play Store. Similarly for Eclipse, it's a Eclipse marketplace. So you can simply download the required plugin from here. Yep, so if you see on my machine, this it's already there actually. Okay, so if you see, it's in install stage. Just a second. Okay, so if you see on my machine, I already have this plugin installed, right? In your case, if you're doing it for the very first time, you would see the word install. All you need to do is just click on the install button here, and then it will just ask whether you want to install. Just say yes, like that. Okay, that's it, right? Now my Eclipse has got TestNG plugin onto it. Now how do I use it? So let's create one project. So I'm going to create module, let's say 8. I'll create module 8 and I'll name it as TestNG. Okay, now this is the project, as you know. Now I'm going to create one package here. So I'll create package 1 basics. Okay, and over here, let's take an example of a Gmail website. I want to do the automation of a Gmail website, right? So of course there are different test scenarios, test cases here. So what I'm going to do here, I'll say Gmail, let's say a regression. I have created one class with the name Gmail regression, right? Now if you see, this is the class. Now in the earlier modules, what we learned is that we used to create the main method. But in TestNG, what we have to do is, let's say I want to automate one test scenario. That is, I want to automate scenario of sending a mail. So I'm going to create a method, public void, let's say send mail test case. Okay, you can like with underscore or anything is fine. Okay, for example, send mail, and I've got something called as test case, right? So I've created a method here. Now in TestNG, we create for each test case, whichever we want to automate, we create test method for it. Okay, that's the instance method, and on top of that, this is very important, we specify something called as @test, right? So @test is the annotation of TestNG. Okay, if you attach that annotation to a method, this TestNG will treat this as a test case or test scenario which you are automating. Okay, now the moment you write down here, of course you need to import this, right? So I'll just do a mouse over. Now you have to carefully add TestNG library here. Okay, so I'm going to add that. So if you see now, TestNG charts are imported in my project, right? And of course they are coming through in the form of plugin, because I had added it as a plugin. So Eclipse has those jars with him, and then it has imported in the project now. Okay, so I've got jars. Now the next step is to import this class in the scope. So I'm gonna again do mouse over here and then say import so and so class, right? So of course this is coming from TestNG, right? Now now what I'm going to do here, I'll simply say here sys out. Let's say I'm writing a dummy code here. Okay, sys out, and just a second, it's taking time. Yep. So I just want to print something here. Okay, for example, I'm gonna say here running send mail test case. Yeah. So if you see, so let me repeat. So in TestNG, whenever you want to automate any test case with the help of TestNG framework, you have to create one method and you have to add @test over here. Okay, we don't use main method here as such. Okay, now once you create the test case, how do I run it, right? So if you have seen in the earlier examples, we used to right click, right click and run as Java application. But whenever you're running a TestNG test case, you have to say right click and run as TestNG test. Okay, so if I run this now, so now it will start running this test case. Okay, although it has just one line to print it on console. So let's wait. See, so if you see, so on the right hand side, this is my console. You might see console in the below section in your case, because I have dragged it towards right. Okay, so if you say here, see here, this is the summary of my execution, and what it says, it has executed one test case, there was no failure in it, and it has not skipped anything. So this is the summary of your execution. Whereas at the bottom side, if you see, there is a tab results of running so and so. So these are TestNG results, and if you see, it shows that okay, it has executed one test case which is send mail test case from so and so package, right? So whenever you execute TestNG test case, it shows some summary on the console, as well as it shows TestNG results as well. Okay, now there's one more thing related to results. So now what you have to right click on this project and just do refresh. Okay, and you would see guys here, test output folder is being created, right? Which is created by this TestNG execution. So whenever you execute any test script, any test scenario, test case, okay, it creates this test output folder for that particular run, and if you rerun again, it overwrites the same folder. Now expand this folder. There's one file called as index.html. Right click on this file, go to properties, and this is the path where it is located. So click on this. Now if you see, this is the file, just open it with Chrome, and here guys, you would see that this is a TestNG default report. Okay, whenever you run anything through TestNG, it creates index.html, and that index.html has the information about what you executed, right? Just a second. Yeah, so if you see, this is the TestNG report. Let me close this, and this shows basically what test case you have executed through this TestNG framework. Okay, so nobody uses this report in actual projects, because this information is not at all useful from end user perspective, right? Okay, now let's go back to our test case, right? Now in a class, okay, I have created one test case, but I can very well create as many test cases as I want, right? For example, I'll create one more test case, and this time I will say okay, this is about a read mail test case, right? So I'm going to say this is my read mail. So now in this same class, how many test cases I have? Two. You can define as many test cases as you want. Okay. And now of course, if I run it, you can directly run it from here as well. So on your right hand side, you would see, okay, this time you have executed two test cases, zero passed, zero skipped. And of course, if you see this console now, sorry, this TestNG report, it shows two test cases were executed, right? And if I go back to my again this index.html, it will show me two test cases. Now if you see, two methods, two passed, and these were the names of those test cases. Yeah. Okay, now moving on. Okay, now let's learn some more concepts of TestNG. Okay, now what I'm going to do here, maybe I'll create another package, package 2, and let's learn what do you mean by batch execution. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'll create two classes here. Okay, let's say I want to test two functionalities of Gmail. Okay, so one is around, let's say, send mail, maybe test case. So now I'm going to create my classes as per the functionality. Okay, so send mail test case is one of the most important functionality of Gmail, and here I'm going to create public void, let's say, send mail to valid address. This is one of my scenarios, so I'm creating one test case for it, right? And of course I have to add @test associated with it. So let's import this now, and for our understanding, I'll put sys out here. Okay, and I'm gonna say here, okay, this is my send mail to valid address test case. Okay, so let me, sorry, like this. Okay, and I'm gonna create another test case here. Okay, maybe I'll say send mail to invalid address. Okay, so I've got two test cases related to this class, right? So as I said, you can define two test cases as well in the same class, right? Now let's say I've got another functionality in Gmail, so I'm going to create another class. So generally we create classes as per the functionality. So let's say something called as add contact, right? Let's say I have another functionality, add contact test case. And here again I feel there are two scenarios, public void, let's say add new contact, like this. Okay, sys out, let's say this is my one scenario. So again I'm gonna put something in the sys out, and I will put it with, let's say, @test, because TestNG can only understand when you put @test just above your method. Now it will treat this as a test case 1, and then I'm gonna put another test case here. Let's say add duplicate contact, right? This is, so there are two scenarios here. Now if you don't add @test here, it will not treat it as a test case. So @test is very much required for each test case. Okay, now if you see, in this particular class I have two scenarios. In this particular class again I've got two scenarios. So in all I have got four scenarios under this package. Now if I want to execute both, all these four scenarios, how do I execute actually? Okay, so what I can do here, I can select these two scenarios. Okay, and then I have to create something called as testng.xml file. So I've selected, go all the way down to testng, and there's an option called as convert to testng. I'm not sure if you can see it, just a second. So right click over here. Okay, and then at the bottom you see testng, convert to testng, right? So if you see, so this is a very important file of testng, and so the name of this file is testng.xml. You can change it as per your convenience, testng. And then there's the suite name. Maybe I'm gonna say, let's say, Gmail regression test suite. Okay, let's say Gmail, like this. Okay, and I'm gonna create it. I'm gonna click on finish here. So what does it mean? What I did here? So basically, if you want to create batch execution of your test cases, for example, when you want to run all test cases in one go, we create one batch execution file, and that is nothing but this testng.xml. And how I did it, I have selected classes whichever I want to execute, right click, just say testng, convert to testng, and that's it. Okay, now if I open this file will have the information of your in-scope classes whichever you want to execute. And now if you see, if I just click on this file, it will execute all the test cases which are present in these classes actually, right? So if you see now, it has executed add duplicate contact, add new contact, then send email, and so on. So 4 test cases got executed, right? And if you see the TestNG summary as well, it shows that from this package it executed these two, from this package it executed these two, right? So of course, if you add new classes to your project, then of course you need to add those packages in the scope of your testing.xml, then only it will pick them. Okay, so what is batch execution? So coming back to the problem statement, as I mentioned here, if you want to do a batch execution, what we simply did, we created testing.xml in the project, and then we are simply executing it. So it would execute all the in-scope classes which we have defined actually. Okay, so tomorrow, let's say if you if so so if you take some practical example, okay, let's say in your project you have got 100 test cases, right? So what you have to do is select all 100 classes and create testng.xml file and simply execute it. So that testng.xml file will act as a batch file, and it will invoke all the in-scope classes whatever you have defined. Yeah, so I hope you have understood batch execution. Yeah, now moving on. Okay, now let's understand what you mean by priority in testing. So I'm going to create one package 3 priority, right? And here I will add this class. I'll copy the same class just to save time. Okay, so if you see here now let me add one more scenario here. Let's say I want to log into my login to Gmail first. So I'm going to create login first. Okay, and then maybe towards the end I want to log out, right? So if you see here I have defined four test cases, right? Now if I run these 4 test cases, if you see, without testing.xml, I'm straight away running the class itself. So if you see, it will execute these 4 test cases. But if you see, the order in which it has executed is not as we want, right? It is executing add duplicate first, then add new contact, and then log in and then log out. But from a user perspective, if you see, we want to run login first, then log out, then add new contact, then duplicate contact, and then log out. So how do I define priority, or how do I define sequence of execution, right? So there comes the concept of priority. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to define priority here equals to 1. So I want to execute this test case first. Okay, then maybe I want to execute this as a second. Okay, and this as maybe third, and then I want to execute this as a fourth, right? This is the sequence I want to execute, rather than just picking this as per the alphabetical order, right? If you don't define priority, it's gonna pick them alphabetically. For example, it will pick this first, then this one, then login and log out. But that's not the thing I want, right? Now I've defined the priority, and now if I execute, you'd see, guys, it would execute in the same sequence what I had defined actually. So sorry, my bad. See, so now if you see, it has executed login first, then add new contact, duplicate, and log out, because I've defined priority here, right? So priority is a flag in TestNG. If you add it to your test, it will execute or it will pick test cases as per the priority. So of course, one is the first, second, third, and you can define same priority to multiple test case as well. For example, in these two I don't mind whichever gets picked first, that's okay. So I've defined priority as 2 here, that's fine. Okay, so I don't have any preference over these two methods, any one of them can be executed, so I can define 2 for these two test cases. Okay, logout should be the last one, so I've defined logout as 4 and login as 1, right? now Now let's understand what do you mean by dependency. So for example, if you see, if my login gets failed, I don't want to execute rest of the test cases, because of course, if the login is successful, then only I want to execute add new contact, or rather if the login is successful, then only I can do the further part, right? So what I can do here, sorry, okay. So what I can do here, I can define the dependency. So I'm going to say here depends on, okay. So I'm going to depends on method. This is dependent on, let's say, login. So I want to say if the login is passed, then only you execute these test cases. So again, this one. So what I did here, I've defined, okay, if the login is successful, then only you execute it. So now if I execute, so of course login is getting passed and it's executing all of them, right? But what happens if login fails? So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to put 100 by 0 here, so it will create one exception, right? So of course, when the exception is created within the test scenario, it fails, right? And since these three are dependent on login, those should be skipped actually. So if I run this now, so you would see, guys, okay, so if you see, one has failed, which is login, because I have added exception, and it has skipped 3, right? And if you see the TestNG report as well, it says, okay, login has failed, and the rest of the 3 test cases, they were dependent on login. That's the reason it is showing them as skipped. Okay, so if you see, it's an orange color, and for failure it shows red, and for pass it shows green actually. Yeah, so you can define dependency as well. Okay, now moving on. Now, there's another concept in TestNG, and that's called as grouping. Okay, so let me create package for grouping. Okay, and what it is. So again, let me add same example here. Okay, and for learning this grouping, let me remove this priority. Now instead of priority, I can define groups actually. For example, this test case belongs to a regression group. Okay, again, for example, adding a new contact, I want this to be a part of my, let's say, regression group. Okay, so we are just dividing test cases into different groups. So again, I'm gonna define one more group here, and like this. Okay, so let's say this belongs to sanity. Okay, so what I did here, guys, basically I have distributed my test cases into 2 groups. Just a second. Okay, now 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 let's say at any point of time, for example, as I mentioned, I've got 100 test cases in my test pack. Okay, and out of those 100, let's say 75 belongs to regression, 25 belongs to sanity. And if my in a release, let's say if I have a limited time to execute these test cases, so of course we would prefer to go for sanity, right, rather than regression, because regression takes time. So how do I control that actually? How do I tell TestNG, okay, only execute regression test cases, don't execute the sanity one? Okay, so for that, guys, okay, what you have to do is, first of all, create the TestNG file, right? So I'm going to say TestNG convert to TestNG. Okay, let me rename, otherwise it will override the existing file. Let's say groups. Okay, and just say finish. So it has created one testing.xml file. Just open that. Now here in this block, you need to tell TestNG, okay, can you please include these test cases and exclude these ones? Okay, so you need to define that information here. So let me do that. So for example, I've got groups. Okay, then I'm gonna say run information, and I'll say include, let's say, regression. Okay, so if you see here now, so include, and I'll define this as exclude. Okay, like this, yeah. And let's define this as sanity. Okay, so if you see in my testing.xml, I've defined some additional information, and what I'm defining here. Okay, when you execute testing.xml, only execute groups which has name regression, and you can exclude the sanity one. Okay, now if I execute this one, you would see it has executed only 3 test cases, right? So if I go back to our grouping, so just a second. Yeah, so if you see here, so let me remove this divided by 0. So in my class, I was having 4 test cases, right? So 3 belongs to regression, okay, and 1 belongs to sanity actually. And I have, if you see my TestNG underscore groups, here I have included regression group, excluded sanity. So it has only executed 3 test cases, this one and this one. It didn't executed the sanity one. Now if I do the other way around, maybe I'll shuffle the sanity to include and regression to exclude. So what it should do now, of course, it should execute only the sanity ones and exclude the regression one. So if you see, it has executed only add duplicate contact, right? Which is this one, right? Which belongs to sanity. So this really helps a lot when you have test scenarios, or let's say 500 test scenarios, and you only want to execute some scenarios which are related to, let's say, payment functionality, or some scenarios which are related to only let's say ad profile. So you can define as many groups as you want in your test pack, and then you can just invoke those groups which are you are interested in. Okay, so I hope you have understood what do you mean by grouping, right? Okay, so let me quickly revise what we learned. So TestNG is a framework from Apache. In order to install or add TestNG plugin to Eclipse, you need to go to Help Eclipse Marketplace, and then you add it as a plugin. So Eclipse will hold that information forever. Then I've created a project. Then in that project, we created one package. Then we learned address test annotation, which is one of the very important annotation of TestNG. So in TestNG, whichever test case you want to automate, you define one method for that test case, and you add address test annotation on top of that, so which is a TestNG annotation, right? And when you run it, it shows information in the console, as well as it shows TestNG execution summary as well, right? Then you also, whenever you execute, test output folder always gets created in your project. You have to refresh to see it, okay? And then for every execution, it overrides the test hyphen output folder, right? In test hyphen output folder, you have got an index.html file. You can open it and you can see TestNG execution result. As I said, it's never used in the real projects, okay? We always use customized reports. Then we talked about batch execution. Let's say in a project you have got different classes. In all classes you have got different test cases. If you want to run them in one go, okay, if you want to create a batch execution file of all these test cases, you always select these 2 files, then create testing.xml of it, and then you execute your entire suite from here. Okay, then we talked about what is priority. Priority is basically when you want to define the sequence of your test execution, then you always define priority, right? Then you can also define dependency among test cases. That will help to skip dependent test cases, right? If the login itself is failing, you do not execute the other one. So you can define depends on here, right? Then the last one we learned about grouping. You can divide your test cases into different groups, and you can execute the groups whichever you are interested in through your TestNG configuration. So here if you see, I have included sanity and I have excluded regression. So it will only execute the sanity ones, right? So I hope you have understood what TestNG is. So in the upcoming sessions, we're gonna learn how we embed Selenium code in TestNG test case, and how we can create frameworks out of it. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot for watching this video. All right. Goodbye.